So we have a couple of subject matter experts here with us today that will be helping facilitate this conversation in regards to any questions you might have and also how to best serve these families. I'll let them introduce themselves. We can go ahead and start with Don.
Okay, I'm Don Rhodes. I'm working part-time right now out of the registrar's office, Veterans Services. My primary duties are to assist veterans and military affiliated dependents to seek and gain employment upon graduation, and I assist them also in gaining relevant work experience while they're in school, whether it be internships or part-time jobs or co-op eds or whatever. So that's my main focus. I served in the military in 1965 to 67, so I'm of that older generation during the Vietnam era. I grew up in Iowa City. It was interesting coming home to Iowa City in those years. It was not a period of time in our history where the Vietnam War, for those of you who are young enough that don't know enough about it, but it wasn't a very popular campaign, I would say. So, but anyway, that's anything else, Ureli, that I want? I retired from the Veterans Affairs. I worked there for a number of years as a rehab counselor, and my area of interest is basically rehab counseling and employment. So.
Great. You want to go next?
Sure. My name is John Michelson. I'm with the Midwest Military Outreach as the government liaison, and on the side I work with the employer support of the Guard and Reserve, and my job is to connect veterans and their families with local resources. I mean, there's a lot of really great programs all over the country, but a career fair in Chicago doesn't mean a whole lot when you're living in Coralville on a student's income. So.
And then we were just joined by Julia Rose. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, Army veteran. I also now am a social worker for the VA. I'm out of the Coralville office. My job title is local recovery coordinator, so I do clinical work, working with veterans, sometimes spouses, as well as doing community presentations and engagement and events.
Okay, so if one of you could answer, why might teachers find it difficult to understand military children? Who would want to go first?
It's a changing population in the sense that people are deploying or there's peacetime, so there's not as much going on, but I think the climate of even the military population is always shifting, and so children's needs are a little different. Also, 1% of our population serves right now, so imagine it's probably a small percentage, seemingly, of kids that you see, but there's certain communities that have a lot more of that than others, and so I think it's one, just lack of cultural awareness, and two, also the shifting needs of the military.
I think also a lot of the active duty military installations are along the east and west coast. And here in flyover country, the concentration is National Guard and reservists. So you may only have one student in your school that's affected because mom's a recruiter, or you may only have 15 students in the school only because the local Guard unit was called up to go to Puerto Rico. And you know, there is not a identification method for those students.
What other resources would be available in other states?
Other resources, what, Ureli?
Like resources as far as, we don't have a lot of active duty bases here, but other states, students might become teachers in other states. What kind of resources do you think they could tap into in other states?
Just for one, military community in general, you're around a lot of other people that are familiar with the community, because in some areas the military base is what gives it financial stability. If the military base closes, there's like economic downturn. So it's a big part of the community, and I think a lot of people have a bigger awareness. So one, you have community support, which is the best resource that we can't create, just naturally occurring, as well as resources on posts. You have different centers for engagement, workout gyms, things that you probably have to pay a lot more money outside of a post. So just the stability of a military base is a huge piece of it.
Child and Youth Services, Army Community Services, or whichever service. But again, you're right, that is what's normal for that community, where someplace like Iowa City, it's just not gonna happen. Nobody understands, so it's not there.
Hospitals.
I would also add to that you don't necessarily have to be active duty or National Guard. You may be your student may be living in a household who is living in a household with a veteran. And of course, every state has a veterans VA hospital. In fact, most of them have multiple locations. We've got one in Iowa City, one in Des Moines. There's vet centers that are specifically designed for certain qualified veterans to receive counseling assistance, and they also do, I think they now do family as well
Oh,
as
yeah. Yep.
as
Family.
well as individual. There's VA regional office where I worked out of. There's counseling staff that work specifically with veterans with disabilities. You've got a state VA system in addition to the federal system, and you have county level as well. So there's a lot, every state has those services. And you have a workforce development specialist who works specifically with veterans to assist them in the, seeking and gaining employment. So there's a lot of resources within not just our state, but every state for veterans and their military and their family members to have access to.
And for teachers specifically, there is a Military Child Education Coalition nationally out of Texas. You can ask those questions.
Yeah, as we mentioned in workshop number 1, there's a difference between students that are at schools near military bases or military posts. Those terms mean the same thing, and so when you're thinking about, well, what does that mean? Think about it like a college campus or a university campus. And when you're closer to the university, you have all of those resources on the campus. So you have the financial aid, you have the admissions office, you have the career services, academic advising. Well, a military installation or military base has those same things, the equivalent of those same things. So if you're closer to that, let's just say college campus, because that's what we understand, then you have more opportunity to utilize those resources. Where in the state of Iowa here, we're not close to those military campuses, so to speak, and so those resources are a little bit more challenging to get to. And so you either reach out to people online, or you rely on what's available from the state and the county that's not necessarily on a military campus. So then if those resources are available, then great, but it's a little bit more difficult to find those resources. So the intent of this workshop is to kind of outline in a deeper perspective of employment and transition from service into education, into mental health counseling, and into a variety of other areas that offer support to military students, and then military children going through the whole process with the service member parent. And so this workshop is meant to really kind of dig deeper than workshop number 1, which is an introduction to military children and families, whereas this workshop is really getting into specific areas of challenges, and that's why we brought in the experts here to kind of talk about some of those areas. And so if you have questions along the way in any of those areas, this is the exact group of people to be able to answer those questions, and that's why ISERVE reached out to each one of them, and they graciously have offered their time. So I'll turn it back over to you, Relly, now.
So then how would I as a teacher know if a military dependent is in my classroom? And how might I know if a parent of one of those children is deploying or going TDY for a long period of time? And TDY is temporary duty assigned, so there's can somebody go over the difference between like a deployment overseas to just relocating and going and serving in another state or far from the child's home?
I don't think that as a teacher, you're going to know those things unless the child tells you, or in a parent-teacher conference, the parent brings it up. But again, being a garden reserve kind of area, assignments can be anywhere from a 2-week annual training to, I was just talking to a Coast Guard officer who did 5 months in Puerto Rico on very short notice because, you know, they kind of needed him over there. To, you know, deployment where we had some folks in the Iowa Guard gone for as long as 22 months. Again, with little notice on that one. Most deployments to a combat zone, they may have up to a year to prepare for it. But, you know, if they decide that Iowa has resources they absolutely have to have in Houston following a flood, it's like, be here at 8, we're leaving at 9, and you're gone.
A lot of times the news will talk about at least guard units if they're mobilizing, and so paying attention to that. If there is a natural disaster, we can probably assume that some parents are, if they're in the guard reserve, are going to get mobilized for that. So, you know, in some ways I think it gives us a greater connection to what's going on in our community and our nation, because it could impact our hometown even if it's a couple hundred miles away. And I think also just change in the kids' behavior, affect, if they seem slightly depressed. Or sometimes it's because the parent came home and they don't know the parent very well, and the structure, family structure is changing. And that's true for any kid with any challenges or changes in the home environment. There's a lot of homes that are, you know, not the traditional, or family members can come and go or travel for work for long periods of time. And so I think just kind of noticing any changes and talking to the kid about it, and also watching what they draw. Like, learn a lot from that too.
Yeah, the parent may not be attending weekend training close by to your community. The parent may be assigned to a unit 2, 4, 6 hours away. So, you know, just having that awareness that any time a military unit is called could affect your classroom.
One thing about, that just comes to my mind, that the social media technology is so advanced today than in my years when I served in the military in the 60s, when you're gone, you're gone, you know. And today, if you're deployed to any area, I mean, my understanding, and John can address this easier than I, but that there's access to social media technology that the soldier or the can communicate with their family at home, which is quite different than back in 1965, you know, where you had no communication at home. So I see that as a very large benefit in a sense to, particularly to the children. If it's mom and dad that's gone, at least they have some access to them to be able to communicate. So.
Did any of you guys know, I know MSEC, the Military Child Education Coalition, pushed nationally an identifier within the school systems that would be on the registration. Does anybody know any information if that got passed in Iowa or how that played out?
It hasn't yet. Tom Beasley, when he was with the Department of Ed, was working on that.
Yeah.
And at last I talked to him, it had not made it to the State House out of committee.
I guess I'm not sure what that is.
When the student is enrolled,
Yeah.
that it would have a 1-digit identifier that said military.
Oh, okay.
Kind of like the tracking they're doing in universities today for students.
Oh.
I
mean, I guess like too, we have to think about what that means for us. Like if you had that identifier, what do you do with that information
Oh, yeah.
is always a question because, sometimes veterans in university settings don't like to include that because it's personal information. They may not want to talk about it. And so you have this information and nobody's really disclosed it yet. So how do you at least make sure that you're opening a door without trying to get somebody to talk about something they might not be ready to talk about?
One of the issues, again, when Tom was still with the Department of Ed, was if a student transfers mid-semester, they lose academic, or not academic, but athletic eligibility. But if, both mom and dad are deploying, student has to go live with the grandparents, they move from Des Moines to Davenport. Because it's a military move, this would allow them to continue to participate in athletics rather than if they were just going from Bettendorf to Davenport because they were a really great point guard, they got stolen away. So, how do you protect the kids' eligibility?
Are you saying that would happen if it were passed, but it hasn't happened yet?
Correct.
Okay, so,
We have an interstate compact where kids can transfer between states and be protected like that. We do not yet have an intra-state compact to go between districts within Iowa.
So then you did touch on if military family programs are only for elementary age school children, what other programs would be available for children who are not K through 5?
I work for the Child Youth Program for the Iowa National Guard. So we service 5 through 18. That's our age group. So we are 2 people to cover the entire state. So that's where the issue arises. But we're kind of out there at least.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what your program offers?
Yeah, we do. So free event. We're working on regional. Currently trying to have events within each of the main cities in Iowa. So right now we have Sioux City, Council Bluffs, Boone, Cedar Rapids, Dubuque, and Davenport. But we do free events. Basically, any 5 through 18-year-old that has either a brother or a parent or a sibling, a parent, or a aunt or uncle that's serving in the National Guard. They have access to our events, to our resources. So we do resource outreach. We do community outreach stuff, so briefings or talks. And then, those are kind of the primary 30s. Yep.
What kind of events do you do?
Biggest one is summer camp. But we also do just like 2-day events with partnered organizations. There's an organization called Learn, Create, Build that does science, STEM related events, and so we'll do like a 2-day event. We do military family connection nights. We call them MFCs. So that'll be like at the pool. The one coming up in Davenport is at the Putnam Science Museum. We just had one at the skating skating rink in Urbandale. So just different ways to kind of try and build that connection between families and between the kids.
Great. So as providers in K through 5 education, when would be the best time to engage with military families?
I think on Meet the Teacher Night, there's a possibility to identify at that point, early on in the semester.
In a situation where you might have a student in class and he discloses that his dad is a Marine infantryman, and other students ask them if their parent has killed anyone, should they be allowed in their school? How would you handle that situation?
They want to jump in?
I think that's always you know, some of it, I've met veterans who get that question, and there's a spectrum of people that are just like, yeah, 20, you know, or then there's the, like, please don't ask me about it, and then there's the people that, you know, will, depending on how well they know someone, I think the same can be said for, with kids, and I think it's directing the conversation at that point to not be so specific, but talk about, I mean, that's a good opportunity for military education in general. Like, there's a wider range of jobs available within the military. Everyone does something different. Everyone's role is and different, and also, you know, some questions are very personal, and it's okay that if somebody's open to talking about that, that's great. But if not, you know, we have to be very sensitive about hard questions that we ask. I think sometimes with the military, because I don't know if it's because it's a federal job or it's because it has some sort of protection of the country, that I think some people feel that it's their personal experience is wide open for us to ask anything about, and so sometimes there's that guarded level that society just kind of rips open. We forget that they're actually people versus like a product of a military branch. So being sensitive to that is very important.
I think it also depends on, you know, what grade are we looking at? You know, would the same group of students ask why another student uses a wheelchair? Or, you know, why does Nancy have two mommies? Or, you know, any other social convention that confuses kids. So.
I'll just mention that, and I don't know what percentage, but for every combat position, there's either direct or indirect support. And the largest percentage of military personnel are not in a direct line of combat, they're in a indirect or direct support program. I can't figure numbers. Do you know, John, for every
It's like 10 to 1 when you figure in payroll and cooks and fuel.
And
So
that's not to say that a combat individual or non-combat doesn't see combat, you know,
Right.
transportation.
Yeah,
So
I mean, exactly. If you're in a direct support of an infantryman, you're not carrying a weapon per se, and what the old saying, seeking or destroying or whatever, but you're still at risk. So, you know, it's just a matter of education. You know, it's easy to think, well, you were in the military, the statement is, how many people did you kill? Well, that's not everybody's duty, you know what I mean? So.
yeah, but I think it's good to have a conversation about those questions versus shutting it down can just create more curiosity and antagonize that individual for an answer.
Yeah, we bring up these scenarios to help you in the classroom someday, because it's possible that you would have some of your students ask other students in the classroom some really difficult questions about family backgrounds, particularly in this case military backgrounds, that as teachers someday, how would you handle that situation where you have one of your students that's uncomfortable with the other students adding peer pressure to the situation, that maybe that student was already feeling like nobody else understood the family history and the family background of the military, and then these students kind of keep compounding the problem by misunderstanding the situation and thinking that that parent is doing things to harm others intentionally, and their lack of understanding contributes to an even more comfortable situation for that one student. And so these questions are really to help you develop ways to negotiate those situations to help those students. They may be few in your classroom, but they still probably will be in your classroom, as we talked about in workshop 1. Military children are everywhere because military service members are everywhere. And they have families just like anybody else oftentimes, and they may not be located in close proximity to a military campus, which means that they're going to be, if you're teaching in rural Iowa in a small town, you most likely will have military children still in your class in that small town because there's military service members that serve in the small unit down the street. And so then there'll be maybe 1 or 2 in your classroom that may have situations arise like this, but now hopefully you'll be able to handle these situations just by us talking through these types of scenarios. So that's why we ask questions like this.
Do you guys have any questions as we're going through?
Again, it's all age dependent on who you're teaching to, but there's lots of awesome books out there for like when your parent deploys. And even just having that in the classroom if it's age appropriate for the kids you're teaching, just like there is about different family structures or different, kids that's been in foster care system. There's so many great things where you can bring this diverse literature in there so each kid sees something that represents who they are, or even if it's older kids in a lesson, trying to change a story in it to be more culturally diverse, to represent different populations, so you're hearing multiple different stories versus just the majority hearing a story that's similar to their experience.
Yeah, some of these military children oftentimes will feel like they are the one that's also serving in addition to their military parent. They'll, just like children often do, they want to be like their parents, and so they'll throw on a little miniature uniform that they receive for birthday or Christmas or another special event, that they'll act like the service member. They'll act like they're in, and so when that service member, when that parent transitions out of the military, those military children can feel like something's been pulled from them, something has significantly changed in their life, and sometimes that can bring about really interesting ways of them communicating in the classroom, or maybe not communicating. Maybe they just all of a sudden shy away from situations. And so recognize those as a teacher someday, those situations that can be difficult, and maybe it's that military service member just left the military, and therefore that military child is actually missing that part of life, because that's an entire military family, and then that military child maybe didn't want that parent to leave, but that parent was maybe left the military for some reason or another. So I wonder if maybe, Don, if you want to talk about the military employment side of things, or transition to full-time employment outside of the military once a career is done, that can be sometimes a challenging thing, and the military children are going through it just like the service members are. And employment is something big, and many of us understand the struggles of finding jobs. Well, military service members, they're going to have to retire from the military at some point in time, so that struggle is real.
Yeah, it's not unusual that when I ask a question of a student who's recently, a student veteran who has recently left the military and come to the university, my question is, well, why are you at the University of Iowa? And very often the first response I get is, well, I couldn't find a job when I retired from the military, so I know I have GI Bill benefits, by the way, which pays for college tuition and books and supplies. It's a great program. And and I know I need a college education to get a good job, and so here I am. And so that's not uncommon at all to hear that, for me to hear that. And then the next question is, well, what is it you think you want to do? I don't know. I just know I need a college degree to get a good job. And then there's others, well, I was a structural engineer in the Air Force, so I kind of like to but I don't have a degree in engineering, so I want to take that experience that I had in the military and I want to transfer it into the civilian world. Well, the civilian world employers, sometimes don't recognize, it's kind of back to the, what did you do in the military? And it's not the same as being in the civilian. What is it, 1% of the population served? So the largest percentage of employer representatives out there were not in the military, so, my view is that's very transferable into the civilian world, but it's an education piece, so not only for the veteran, but for the employer as well. That's pretty much what I experienced, Jeremy, when I asked that question. So.
And after initial enlistment, you're looking at people coming out between 22 and 26 years old. This is a prime age to have elementary aged kids. Full 20-year retirement, they're somewhere between 38 and 50. These are going to be parents of high schoolers. You've just changed that child's whole world. Their whole identity in, military community, etc., is just gone. Also, between that initial point and retirement, active duty people in states like Iowa will be on remote assignment, like recruiting duty or ROTC instructor, or full-time staff at the local armory. So again, those kids may move every 2 to 4 years and have to start over in your school more often than not.
Another challenge is with in-state guard, because the full-time National Guard people, because it's Iowa, some people decide to leave their kid in their school system and go work at a different armory. So their kid's in Des Moines and they're taking a promotion in Iowa City or Cedar Rapids. So Monday through Friday, that kid doesn't have a parent home, even though it's not deployed, and that could be for a year to 2 years. And that could happen a couple different times. So and then it goes to this single parent, non-single parent household that this child is kind of grown up in.
And, you know, when the parent comes home, then you have to change the whole family structure because that family's been doing without that second parent. So, you know, roles change. All of a sudden, the oldest child is no longer in charge of younger children. They go back to just being another kid.
And I have from Blue Star Families, there's a stat, they surveyed 6,200 military active service veterans and spouses, and it said 60% had or more had deployed more than 12 months since 9/11. 52% had been away from home for something other than deployment. Of that, 50% with children reported having a child who experienced moderate or greater worry as a result of a parent's development. And so sometimes you can see anxiety where these kids are worried about some things going on in the world that maybe other kids aren't as in tune with or in touch with. And so there could be some anxiety and some depression or behavioral issues because of that worry in school, and trying to hone in on, you know, the cause, and that the behavioral issue as a symptom can be challenging too. But it can get, that might be a way you learn about their military family too. So, or in some cases, my brother had that. So I was a sibling, and he had a lot of worry for me when I was in other countries. So there's that too.
Sometimes the idea of a deployment has been, or the actual occurrence of a deployment has been considered to be more difficult in those that stay home versus those that actually go on the deployment. So when we think about the service member is the one, you know, launching off into this, embarking on this journey of a deployment, and with all these other team members, let's just think of the other service members that person is going with as team members. So this entire team is going. Well, the family member, they don't have that. The rest of the family doesn't necessarily have an established team, or may not have an established team like the service member. So the service member is going with maybe multiple hundred or even larger. And so that team is already firmly established. Well, when you think about the difficulties that service member goes through, yes, those are difficult, but that whole team the team integrity is going and doing that together. The military family has to then figure out, okay, what's the equivalent of that support network at home? If that service member is going away with a team, how is that military child that's staying home? Is there a team for that child? Is there a team in the school district that the school district has established a network? Is there a support structure so each person in the military family is leaning on something or someone, the service member leaning on the rest of the service members that are going with, and then the spouse, you know, leaning on maybe a support group like a family readiness support group where there's people in the community that get together. Is the military child, what's the equivalent structure that military child is leaning on? So you get the idea that it kind of takes what person or what group is each person that's involved in the military family and that's in the family, who are they leaning on? And so that military child sometimes may feel left out. Like where's the network for that child? And that child can't understand the complexities of going overseas, of having a parent leave for that long, especially when they're young. I mean, leaving for a year, that child thinks it's an eternity. Basically, could potentially think that parent forgot about them. Mm-hmm. Well, as a teacher, what do you say then when your student says, "I think my parent forgot about me. I think that parent has been gone for so long. I don't even remember the parent." And maybe preschool age, some of these students are just starting to process and learn things that maybe they hardly remember their parent because their parent was gone for a year and a half, and that was basically. They hardly remember their parent actually being there for their life. And so as a teacher, being able to kind of calm them down and saying like, well, that parent won't be gone forever, and let's talk about this. What are your feelings like? Who are you talking to about these feelings? are you able to think about this in a positive way, or is it just such a negative thing that you can't bear the thought of that parent being gone for so long? And so some of these local resources aim to meet that, to fill that gap of where does that military child, where can they channel that stress, or who can they lean on, what groups can they lean on. And so when we think about the Department of Veterans Affairs, where Julia works, that's one of the entities within the community that does fantastic work in reaching out to these families and supporting. And so I don't know if maybe if there are kind of random stories that Julia remembers of working at the VA and interacting with families or interacting with these populations that this is the VA is very large but has unique programs and is well suited to meet some of these needs and fill some of these gaps that maybe the military child or maybe the military spouse just they're trying to lean on someone or some group and they're really searching, and that's where a group like the VA can come in.
It is. It's something else we like to do because, I mean, I know when I got out, the thing that I realized I was missing or that was different was the sense of camaraderie and community that a lot of military members will talk about. Not everybody had a wonderful experience during their service, but there's a huge piece of people that get out and are trying to connect to something, and it's just different because everybody's out. Everybody wants to connect, but everybody's too busy to. It's kind of how our society is these days. And so some of the things that I do that maybe the VA can't fulfill, but we try to have partnerships. So with John's organization, we're also doing a lot of partnership work with NAMI, who has a peer-to-peer class for mental illness or for family members. So if a veteran has PTSD, there's classes that they can go to that are led by their family members of veterans that can help talk about resources, self-care, and support for the veteran. There's organizations like Red, White, and Blue that are more activity-based, and I think a lot of veterans these days are interested in how do I get back out in the community and how do I maintain a level of physical fitness, because physical fitness is great for mental health. And so trying to connect to broader resources so they're not just reliant on, we have some veterans that have been coming for so long to the VA, they don't see expanding outside of that. We really want to be a support system to move them into participating in the community again. And so that's kind of our philosophy too, is how do we build these partnerships so they have a sense of community. It'll be different, but still the civilian version of camaraderie and connection that a lot of us miss in society these days.
Because the VA doesn't work in a vacuum, we have to look at what's in the community. And several years ago, Dr. Biden, the Vice President's wife, put together a Joining Communities initiative. And Iowa has such a group at Camp Dodge that we look at all of those resources, Team Red, White, and Blue, Midwest Military Outreach, the Vet Center, the Student Vets groups, the Red Cross, and in each, I think we've got 6 areas within Iowa. We try to have meetings quarterly to say, all right, what does your group offer? What does your group bring to the table? Hey, I've got a family that needs this. This is just outside of what I do. Can you help them? They may not be aware of child and youth services through the Guard. They may not be aware that, Don's got internships for that student vet. Even babysitting services. What other parents have already been where you are and, have met with this crisis before, so that, we're trying, at least on the state level, to have consolidated resources. So while none of us may have all the answers, we've got a heck of a Rolodex where we can look up somebody who might.
One thing I could see promoting is ERG, it's called Employee Resource Group. Example would be some that I can share with you. Rockwell Collins, they have a internal group of employees who are veterans. They have a veteran organization. It's an ERG, Employee Resource Group. Wells Fargo, Principal Financial Group, John Deere. I can go down a whole list of major corporations that have internal employees who self-identify as a veteran, and so they have an organized group internally as a resource for those employees to go to, as well as their family members. why can't we implement something like that in a major school district? Let's use Iowa City as the example. I don't know how many veterans are in the Iowa City community school system, either as teachers or administrators or staff of some sort. But if they organized and became a employee resource group within the Iowa City Community School District, those children now have a resource they can go to, who have self-identified as a support system within their own organization. Iowa City Schools is an employer. So that might be something as a teacher that you could promote and possibly organize.
And also, you know, some of those teachers are members of these garden reserve units. You know, how do you explain to a kid, you know, Miss Lynch is gonna be gone the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, when we think about these military service obligations, we've talked about in the past that some of them are lengthy and some of them are just for 2 weeks. So you have people that serve in the military full-time that maybe are closer to one of those military colleges. And so they have all these resources, and so maybe that family demographic looks a little bit different because it's full-time. And then you have the part-time, which is oftentimes just that service member serving for a couple days a month on a weekend. And then the 2 weeks, sometimes it can be a little bit longer, but there's usually a time period where each year that service member will be required to do about a 2 or 3 week more kind of longer term obligation, and then that fulfills having a good year, and so they get credit for that year, and that fulfills their military service on the pathway to potentially retiring or leaving the military before retirement. And so in my Army unit, I have people that, this is a part-time unit, that people that come in on weekends and have to arrange childcare for those weekends. Now sometimes maybe they're called in for extra days during the week, and I've had many service members tell me, many soldiers tell me that, well, you know, the spouse is working, the service member is working, there's no one to watch the kids. Well, it's very difficult in those situations to have somebody that they have family obligations, but they also have military obligations, and sometimes these obligations end up competing against each other. And so from a military leader's perspective, I try to be sympathetic to understand that these families are going through a stressful time in just by its very nature of military service, but there's only so much latitude that as a military leader I'm able to give, or other military leaders are able to give, in having somebody miss duty because of family obligations. And so that balance is something that I think many military leaders strive to offer families, but sometimes it's just not possible. And so you get military children that maybe are by themselves more often because maybe the spouse is working, the service member is working, doing mandatory obligations, and then that military child is maybe hanging out at a friend's house more often than typical, or maybe at home alone more often than typical. And so those compound sometimes and can create difficult things in the classroom because of those experiences and that unique background. And so we do put forth efforts to show families that we're supporting them by creating, you know, the support groups for organizations that are getting ready to do one of those longer military obligations, maybe a deployment, maybe a mobilization that's many, many weeks or months long. And so then that family group would be created. But sometimes, maybe if it's a shorter obligation and repeat short obligations, maybe that network wouldn't be established. And so then that military child wouldn't be as well understood, wouldn't have that support. But once again, that's where you as a teacher someday can come in and swoop in and understand the situation. Oh yeah, that's right, you know, I've already interacted with the school counselor and learned some things that I can talk with you about, and then if needed we can bring you over to the school counselor, or this district has this in place, or oh yeah, I'm aware that military children are here, and so because I know that there's a National Guard building, the National Guard Armory right down the street, and so those are some of the ways that you can determine that, oh, I may be more likely working in this school district to have military children in my classroom. So then you can get a heads up on how can I be the best prepared to serve all the subpopulations within my classroom someday. Because you'll have a variety of different backgrounds. Classrooms, of course, as we as most of us study, are becoming more and more diverse. I definitely study that in college level classrooms, and you all probably do just the same in K-12, that understanding unique subpopulations are definitely more and more important nowadays. And so this is one of those subpopulations that you, hopefully going through some of these workshops, it's our goal that you have a better understanding of this specific subpopulation, so that wherever you go, whether it be in a rural community or even an urban community, you'll be able to help these military children and help them in ways that they may not even understand, because they're too young to understand military service, and maybe you're feeling inadequate because maybe you don't have that much of a connection to the military, maybe never served, maybe don't have that many family members that have served. It doesn't really matter as much. The point is that you're putting forth the effort to help that student. You're doing the best you can to understand the context of the situation, even if you haven't served, by going to workshops like this and by reaching out to the school counselor, reaching out to the district, finding out what military units are around there. And so should that situation arise someday where you have a student in your class that has a difficult circumstance, or maybe a group of students, you can maybe speak with one of them or pull them all off to the side and say, you know what, I understand that sometimes there's unique things asked of your family that may be different than other families. And let me know if there's some unique way that I can help you out and be successful, because as we don't want any of our children to fail in the classroom or have struggles that are could be potentially mitigated through support networks. Thinking about these things ahead of time is great for preparation. And so that's why we hold workshops like this, and we bring in the experts in a variety of areas, so that all of this ties together as a support structure for the military family, whether it be employment, or whether it be what the VA offers, or whether it be what nonprofit networking organizations like Midwest Military Outreach, John's organization, offers. These all, we're all trying to do a similar thing, or the same thing: support military service members, support the families, and ISERVE's goal is to help you all as pre-service teachers someday when you're in the classroom understand the context of these situations. These situations can be very difficult, but hopefully as a result of going through these sessions, you'll be able to understand that military child just a little bit more, recognize some of the things that may conjure some doubt in their mind, some question if they can be successful, some question if they fit in, and really help these families. Because there's a lot of good research that's coming out now about military families, and we're at a time in society where military families are kind of almost treasured. I mean, military service is considered a positive thing, which hasn't always been the case. As people like Don can echo, it's been difficult historically for military families to exist, and have society sometimes putting unnecessary pressures, and unfortunately kind of having a negative view sometimes of military service. Well, now, unfortunately, we live in an age where that isn't the case, where military members, they go down the street in uniform, or they go to the gas station and they're having somebody pat them on the back or shake a hand or buy them a meal, and it happens just more often than you can probably imagine. I mean, each time I go to Des Moines, if I'm in uniform, it almost guaranteed it'll happen in one of those capacities: a handshake, a thank you, an offer to buy something, which is wonderful. But how can we take it to the next step of helping, from us knowing the military, helping non-military people understand military settings and that context? Because let's bridge the gap of our understanding, and then it's kind of like one of the old analogy of a rising tide floats all boats. Well, we as military service members, if we can help you all understand the military better, then everyone wins. Our military children win. Hopefully the other families, increasing the knowledge, that the understanding of families, then everybody wins. And so that's why we hold events like this, to help your understanding.
I want to say there's an odd dichotomy in America where we do hold the active or participating service member up on a pedestal, but once we hand them that discharge and put him back in the civilian community as a veteran, all of a sudden a lot of people are fearful that this person is damaged, has PTSD, is a potential threat, has no usable skills, all of which are false. But it's really strange to see the two extremes almost in the same breath. And the people that are coming out of the military still have all those positive virtues we attribute to the actively serving member. And for the kid to see that sudden change in how a parent is treated is very disconcerting for them. You see it trying to get vets jobs. Okay, there's those occasional employers out there that are just ignorant.
Well, we want to be respectful of your time, so if there are any questions, we can answer them at this time. We do want to give a shout out to some of, Ureli can mention some of our future, we have workshops. We have 2 more workshops. Both of them are going to cover different things. I'll just mention them quick for you here. Workshop 4, which is next week, is Being a Family in the Military, Common Family Challenges and Issues, and that's instructed by 2 licensed marriage and family therapists, and so they'll give a unique perspective from working with military families directly as a marriage and family therapist, and what they've seen from the children, what they've seen from the spouses, what they've seen from the service members, in having just loads and loads of experience both within the VA and in the private practice working with military families. And then as a new, actually both of these coming workshops are new, but as the 5th workshop is Teaching Opportunities with Children of Military Personnel, and that will cover some teaching opportunities that you all may want to consider teaching in a Department of Defense school. And those schools are definitely a low percentage of schools in general. As we've talked about from workshop 1, it's around 7% or so students that are of K-12 student age that actually attend a Department of Defense run school. So it's a small portion of students that attend these, but these schools need teachers nevertheless. And so for you all, that may be a really great opportunity for you to learn about unique teaching opportunities that are all over the world in Department of Defense schools. And now that you've been through workshops like this, you're well prepared to work in one of these schools. So don't count yourself out because you don't have a background in military or family members in military. We need excellent teachers in these types of schools, just like we need them in every other school. And so we're excited about offering workshop number 5, and that these unique teaching opportunities in military settings and with military personnel. And our retired associate dean, Dr. Susie Lagos Levens, is going to instruct that, and she's actually taught in a Department of Defense school internationally before, and so she's going to do a wonderful job in that. But we'll open it up to any final questions that you may have. This is all for your benefit. Ureli and I, working as Veterans Resource Specialists with the ISERVE program, which stands for Iowa Support Education Resources for Veterans and Enlisted. We support military and non-military. Non-military by way of helping them understand what the military is and who military service members are. So we're here to help the whole college, not just a small portion of the college. So we really focus on everybody, and how can we, again, bridge that gap of understanding. So if there's any final questions, you can answer those this time. Feel free to grab some lemonade on your way out if you want.
I think one of the questions I have that comes up, especially with the Air National Guard, they now use drones. So the Air Guard will be on in-state deployment, so their parents will go and to a base and be deployed, but they're orchestrating these drones from Des Moines, Iowa. And I've had some parents comment that their older kids disagree with what they're doing as a profession. Just that they some of them have the capacity to kill remotely. So how, as in a teacher's perspective, or just in any perspective, how do you help kind of heal or support that kind of dynamic?
That's a good question. Yeah, do any of our panelists want to jump in? I maybe have a little bit of thoughts on that. I don't know if anybody wants to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very complex question because
Yeah.
it's, it covers different realms, and so, I think parents and their students often disagree on things, especially as you get to more independence as you grow up. I mean, it could be religious views, it could be cultural views, it could be political views, it could be military views. And I think without taking it aside, teaching kids to examine both sides of things and the pros and cons without saying, this is good or this is bad, or no, they need to do it or no, they don't need to do it. And trying to create some more critical thinking, open-mindedness, and validation for where they are in their viewpoint, and that's okay too. And their parents are in a different place, mindset, or just doing it because they're trying to get their 20 years in, and this is the job they got. So there's different reasons and motivation, and I think trying to broaden that to understand would be helpful.
Yeah.
Critical thinking piece.
One of the things you also could run into is extreme political views among your peers. As evidenced just in California a couple weeks ago, a teacher lit into a student for wearing a Marine Corps t-shirt, telling him, military was the lowest of the low and had no place in society. And I ran into a similar situation here in Iowa City at West High. We had a young man accepted into West Point, and the guidance counselor told him he didn't have to go, we could get him into college instead. So there are a broad range of opinions out there that, of course, your student is going to be confused.
I think, yeah, getting to the, as best you can, asking about what's truly bothering the student. Is it the service in the military? Is it that exact position? Is it what's asked of them on a daily basis? And really trying to get to the bottom of it, and then ultimately probably relying on your school counselor. If your individual school or if your district has a school counselor, that's a great point in time to bring in that school counselor. I'm not a trained counselor, and so I can only give just a really basic response to that question. But it's a difficult question, and as a teacher, that may be more than what you're able to handle personally in that question. Then you bring in additional experts that are trained to kind of navigate those situations. But yeah, just getting down to what's really bothering that student, I think it would be the best thing, and then trying to get to the point maybe where they can disagree maybe with some of the aspects of service, but be positively supporting the parent in service in general, and not maybe the specific nature of the service, but the service at large. Maybe that's a good way of kind of supporting it in general, but then also maintaining personal opinion.
It's just a good life lesson in general. I mean, teaching empathy, when you really think about it, it's like you teach empathy by showing empathy, and you teach open-mindedness by showing open-mindedness. And as a mental health therapist, I have clients, 50% of the time of political beliefs that are talking about issues that I, helping them process, but it's like, oh, that isn't my personal belief or opinion. And I have to set that aside and help them for what their goals are, because it's not about me. And as teachers, I see that role as the same thing. We're really creating an atmosphere where people can be truthful and process, and that's so much better than creating rigid minds that are not able to kind of see the other side and still not agree with that side. It's a very powerful role.
Okay, well, we'll conclude today. Thanks everybody for attending ISERVE's workshop number 3. Thank you to our panelists today. You did an excellent job. We really appreciate you spending the time with us today. If any of you ever have any questions that are military related or ways that you think that ISERVE can help you be successful as a teacher someday, reach out to us, whether it be before graduation or 5 or 10 years down the road, that ISERVE will still be here. And so you can use us as an alumni of the college and help to navigate some of these military questions. And if you feel like you don't have anybody in your school district, well, you always have ISERVE. So reach back out to the College of Ed, and we're ready to help you at a moment's notice. So just let us know how we can help you. But have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you for attending.
Thank you. There's some family magazines on the back that are sent out to serving members from the last couple months. Feel free to help yourselves. If anything left, I got to drag back to your relatives.